Hi, my name's Richard Am, and I would like to present to you Wheelchairs Through Time, which is a visual history of the wheelchair. The earliest known wheeled artifact dates from roughly 4000 BC, but the earliest wheels were actually pottery wheels, which date back from 4200 BC. And roughly 1,000 years later, we have some of the first solid wheels being used. And roughly 1,000 years again, in 2600 BC, we have the first wheels with spokes. This toy chariot found in a children's grave in Turkey dates back to 3000 BC. In ancient Egypt, from 2500 BC, we have an example of a palanquin being used to transport somebody with restricted growth. 2,000 years later, we have Confucius being moved around on this wheeled palanquin. One of the few descriptions of God from the Old Testament actually describes him being sat on a throne with wheels. Hephaestus was a disabled god of blacksmithing and fire from the Greek pantheon. He had twisted legs and crafted for himself a chariot with wings that could magically fly. The departure of Triptolemus from 530 BC shows what seems to be a wheelchair with handles and footplates. Zhuge Liang was a military strategist in ancient China who was thought to have a disability and was transported on various wheeled devices. These are thought to be the earliest depictions of wheelchairs. You can see that they're trikes with backrests, and these are from 525 AD. In Europe, almost 1,000 years later, we have this depiction of a wheelbarrow being used as an assistive device. Additional wheels were added to these wheelbarrows to enhance their functionality. This is one of my favorite examples of a wheelchair from history, and it has 3 wheels and the ability for the user to steer themselves. And I love the detail of the chamber pot as well as the walking stick. This was a custom wheelchair made for King Philip II of Spain, and it's notable for its adjustable backrest and footrests. Stephen Farflier is the Da Vinci of wheelchair designers, and he essentially came up with a lot of designs which are still used today. Here you can see him in a cog-driven wheelchair, and this was 200 years before the invention of the bicycle. He was a watchmaker by trade and was paraplegic, and here we see a modern replica of what it likely looked like. He also created several designs, one of which is the progenitor of the modern manual wheelchair. Sir Thomas Fairfax had a wheelchair which was able to be moved around by moving the handles in a circular motion. Trikes were very popular among royalty in the 1600s, and here we can see examples of King Louis of France and Frederick the Great of Prussia. In 1735, John Joseph Merlin designed this invalid or gouty chair, and he later went on to invent the roller skate. This luxurious wheelchair, and probably the best looking one in the collection, was made for the Holy Roman Empress Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick von Wolfenbüttel in 1740. Not everyone in society was as lucky to have access to wheelchairs, however, and here we have a series of examples of what life was like with other types of assistive technologies. During the French Revolution, there was a revolutionary who was disabled called Georges Couthon, and here we can see him being transported on a palanquin, and also a drawing with him and his pet. His personal wheelchair was a wonderful example of how these gears operated. The Bath chair was invented in Bath in 1783 and was used by Queen Mary. This is Andrew Whiston, who had restricted growth and was known as the King of the Beggars. He was primarily mobilizing by using a fairly simple chair with solid wheels and using these sticks to kind of push himself along. In the 1800s, animal power was often used to augment assistive devices. Here is the wheelchair of Michael Faraday, which is currently on display at the Athenaeum in London. The velocipede is a wheelchair which uses sticks to drive the axle on the wheel. Here we have examples of very simple designs made out of wood. Here we have a range of assistive devices which were used by people who did not have access to wheelchairs. The very first pushrooms were invented in 1881, and here they can be seen being used by Queen Victoria. This wheelchair has pockets, which is an innovation that I was unable to find an example of before or since. This remarkably advanced looking electric wheelchair was developed in 1882. From the same point in time, we have this beautifully ornate chair made of iron and wood. In 1900, the very first wire-spoked wheels were used on a wheelchair, and here we have them being used by King Edward VII. Rosa May Billinghurst was a suffragette from Lewisham who fought for women's rights to vote. My favorite feature of this wheeled lounge chair is the arm which slides off to the side to allow for side transfers. Many tandem bikes from the 19th century were actually driven using arms. One of the fairly old designs which still made it to the 19th century was this platform with four wheels, which the user uses two sticks to drive themselves forwards with. This is the wheelchair of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the President of America. Officially, the first electric wheelchair was a converted manual wheelchair, which was made by George Klein in 1950. In 1951, one of the most famous artists of all time, Frida Kahlo, painted this portrait of her with her physician. 1963 saw the first joystick-controlled, made-for-purpose powered wheelchair, which was made by Permobil, which is still a fairly well-known brand of wheelchair manufacturer today. Many modern wheelchair designs are overpriced and impractical, such as the $30,000 iBot wheelchair from 2001, which can climb stairs. There are many modern examples of extremely low-cost wheelchairs which adapt fairly easy to obtain household items. However, these have been associated with pressure sores. Many modern sports wheelchairs are infused with the design language borrowed from bikes. The modern era provides us with a whole range of different wheelchair designs. The $5,000 off-road Freedom chair uses control mechanisms similar to the velocipede. This is the Safari seat, which was made specifically for international development and can be easily built and repaired using bicycle parts. There are also wheelchairs made for toddlers. The WYSIBUG wheelchair is also made for young children. And there are also wheelchair harness devices made for pets. Currently, 110 million people on Earth need wheelchairs and do not have them. Thank you very much for listening.